Lord Alton.
Yes, thank you, David Alton. I'm a member of the Lords. Building on the reply that you've been giving us to the question that Baroness Lawrence asked about the scale of the problem, I mean, if you can tease that out for us as well, that would be helpful. I'd like to ask you to go further on what you've just said, Professor, about the way in which Article 4 violations can occur to all sorts of other categories of people, and that this is much wider, even without the evidence, but it's much wider than we might assume. And could you give us just a few examples of what you mean by that? And the committee is especially interested in the position of children. I wonder if you could tell us what evidence you have about exploitation and the violations of Article 4 concerning children.
I personally don't have. I can look it up later on.
Children's. Write to the committee as well.
Sorry.
Perhaps you could write to the committee then.
Yes, I can write to the committee. Yes, in terms of other groups of workers, there is evidence that, for example, agency work, which is a type of work that was originally, when we had agency workers, they used to cover specific short-term needs that employers had when someone was ill, for instance. Well, nowadays, in reports that I mentioned, and I can send the committee later, of the Resolution Foundation, for example, what we see nowadays is that agency workers are used for various employers, big businesses, universities use agency workers as their cleaners permanently, because in this way they avoid some of the legal obligations that they would have if they employed workers directly. This is not about child labor, but about other examples with evidence and numbers. There are hundreds of thousands of agency workers nowadays in the UK. So
that's a very helpful reply, thank you. Perhaps your colleagues might want to add to that?
I'd just like to add a few words on the increased use of very restrictive visas in the UK, work visas. And I mean, I'm sure committee members have seen a lot in the media recently about health and social care worker visas. And visas which are restricted in the scope of work, and the employer is also the sponsor, do make it very difficult for workers to raise complaints around exploitation, because in doing so they jeopardize not only their employment but their immigration status. And you know, we're often talking about workers who do have dependents. They've made big sacrifices, maybe they're large family members, they might have made financial sacrifices, they might have borrowed a lot of money to work in the UK, and then when the work isn't available or doesn't turn out to be as was promised, doing anything to jeopardize that work is very difficult if your visa is tied in any way to that sponsor. Even categories where you can, in theory, change employer, the actual practice of being able to do so when your visa sponsor is your employer is difficult.
Thank you, Kate. I wonder if I can ask Alex specifically about your experiences with Callahan, because in an earlier inquiry by the committee we had some very compelling evidence from Callahan. A young woman came and gave evidence to us who had been brought to this country by her, in inverted commas, employer. She'd escaped eventually, ended up in Piccadilly and was rescued by Callahan, literally dressed only in her night clothes. We were shocked to hear her story. She was quite young, but not a child. And I wonder, again, going back to the question that I asked about children, whether you have any evidence that you're able to give us from the victims that Callahan has dealt with, whether any of them are underage, or how would that kind of evidence come to light?
We don't deal with child clients specifically. We would signpost them to the NSPCC, Barnardo's, or a local authority. But we do have not necessarily a significant number, a handful every year, for whom the exploitation started as children. And some of them, I think, we recently interviewed a client where the exploitation started when she was 5.
Goodness.
And so we will interview them about their experience from that point until adulthood when they come to us. We would say they are exceptionally vulnerable because, of course, their education, their development generally has been arrested, usually at the time the exploitation starts, and so they have particular vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. And they are particularly tragic cases.
I think we're all pretty shocked to hear that someone as young as 5 could have been exploited in this way. It's the sort of thing Lord Shaftesbury tried to do something about in the 19th century. Again, without pressing you and not wanting to break any rules around anonymity, if you're able to share with the committee afterwards, again, in writing some case studies, I think we'd all be appreciative.
I will certainly look at that, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.